Hello. Today we're going to go over the story of Dr. Death, aka Christopher Dunst, and the case of medical malpractice. This case faces many ethical challenges, and the reason why I chose this story in particular is because I've always been interested in the business aspect of healthcare and how money seems to be the driving factor in this industry over patient lives and health of and well-being of citizens. So, a quick synopsis. Dr. Christopher Dunst was a neurosurgeon with many great reviews on his Facebook and his Health Grades page. Though he was a relatively new surgeon at the time, this doesn't speak much about how he actually was. To patients, he was seemingly the best spinal surgeon in the state of Texas. However, later on, these reviews would be proven to be false after many of his patients ended up critically injured after waking up from their surgeries. Some patients weren't able to walk, some turned paraplegic, and some patients even faced death. No matter how impactful the result was, all patients had one thing in common: their lives are changed forever. They aren't able to do the same things that they once did after being operated on by Dr. Dunst. So, a little background on Dr. Dunst. Chris Dunst, he was born on April 3rd, 1971. He lived a fairly normal childhood, and his father was a physical therapist and also a Christian missionary. His mother was a teacher, and Chris went to a Christian high school. He was also on the football team there. Many of his teammates recalled Christopher as a competitive person. He always wanted to be the best at anything, and he also had unrealistic expectations of himself. He wanted to prove anyone that doubted him. And after high school, he went on to Millsaps College on financial aid, but then later ended up on the Colorado State Rams and played as a linebacker. After this, he decided to transfer again, and this decision actually ended his football career. So, after he ended his career as a football player, Dunst decided to pivot into becoming a doctor. He attended medical school at the University of Tennessee, and there he actually completed his MD and his PhD at the university. He also completed his neurosurgery residency there. In his time there, he published several medical research papers, and then after college, he actually co-founded a biotech startup called Dysgenic. He founded it with two other scientists, a wife and a husband. He listed himself on the patent for the technology for Dysgenic, along with the other two scientists, though he didn't contribute much to the technology. Later, he was actually kicked off the company and kicked off the board because of alcohol and drug abuse. So there are other key characters that are important to this case as well. The two important doctors in this case are Dr. Kirby and Dr. Henderson. Dr. Kirby was a surgeon, and he worked in the same hospitals that Dr. Dunst did. While he was working, a patient that Dr. Dunst had performed surgery on was in critical condition, and Dr. Kirby had to perform an emergency surgery on Dr. Dunce's patient. After Dr. Kirby performed the surgery, he saw how much Dr. Dunce botched this patient's surgery. It looked to him as though Dr. Dunce was either a terrible surgeon or he botched this person on purpose. Dr. Henderson was in the same boat. He was a highly respected surgeon in the Dallas, Texas medical industry. He even developed special techniques for spinal surgery. He ended up doing revision surgeries for Dr. Dunce, and he noticed that Dr. Dunce wrote step-by-step instructions on the correct procedures on how to perform the surgery. But what Dr. Henderson observed was that Dr. Dunce performed a completely different surgery, and he did everything completely wrong on this patient. Both Dr. Henderson and Dr. Kirby were completely different in personalities, but they had one thing in common. They both wanted to prevent Dr. Dunce from ever performing any medical surgeries or services for anyone ever again. They tried to prevent him from ever injuring or killing another person again. Though Dr. Dunce had at least 33 counts of malpractice, here are just a few of the stories from the patients. Jerry Sommers, he was a childhood friend of Dr. Dunce. Jerry had neck and back pain from a car accident and thought that Dr. Dunce was qualified enough to perform the surgery for him. He thought that he could trust him. He was his friend after all. And during the surgery, Dunce left little bone connecting the spine to the head, and Jerry had also suffered from blood loss. After waking up from the surgery, Jerry realized he was paraplegic and couldn't move anything from below his neck. And after that, his life changed forever. After the surgery, it was admitted that Dr. Dunce did cocaine the night and the morning before he performed the surgery. This was a typical thing for Dunce. Another patient, Kelly Martin, she had a herniated disc, and it should have been a relatively simple and quick surgery. However, it ended up taking several hours. And after the surgery, Dunce said everything was okay, but then sent Kelly to the ICU, and she later passed away. The family had been devastated by this. And lastly, Mary Eford. She was 74 years old when she had surgery performed by Dr. Dunce. He ended up operating on the wrong place on her back. Her case was one that landed Dunce in prison due to her age. They actually tried Dunce for injury to an elderly person, and they won that case. Dunce performed 38 surgeries in a span of 2 years, and 33 of the 38 patients had an issue resulting from their surgery performed by Dr. Dunce. He had multiple malpractice cases at Baylor Plano, and they reprimanded him by forcing him to resign, rather than letting him go. He was still able to work at his second hospital in Dallas, Texas, because Baylor had failed to report him to the medical board. Even after being let go at Dallas, Texas Medical, he still had not been reported. Surgeons and patients had to take measures into their own hands in order to stop him. How did Dr. Dunce get away with his crimes for so long? Hospitals were simply afraid of getting sued if they reported him. Had Baylor reported him earlier, They could have saved many patients from lifelong injuries and death. Dunts look good on paper, and neurosurgeons bring in tons of money for hospitals. They profit around several $1,000,000 a year from neurosurgeons alone. And many hospitals ended up overlooking his complaints for this very reason. He was a neurosurgeon. Another reason why Dunts was not caught earlier was because the medical board needed more reasons to act in order to avoid lawsuits. They were afraid of being sued by Dr. Dunts. And lastly, lawyers didn't want to take any cases for medical malpractice. The reward is capped at $250,000 for any medical malpractice case, and that's just too low for lawyers to take. What ethical challenges were faced in this case? There were many ethical challenges faced. The medical board wouldn't act on reports because they didn't want to be sued. The hospitals were greedy and wanted money, so they hired him because neurosurgeons bring in the most money. And also, the medical industry is driven by money, and they don't put the general well-being or health of its citizens first, which is immoral and unethical. I would say I have to disagree. Health and well-being of citizens should always come first. The lawyers wouldn't even take cases because they weren't making enough money on their cases. The verdict. We need more laws in place in order to protect patients from low standards of care and also corrupt physicians like Dr. Dunts. We also need more laws to protect hospitals, surgeons, and patients for displaying concern and voicing their opinions about surgeons or even physicians. And lastly, we also need to raise the cap for medical malpractice lawsuits.